Diem had long believed that life would never offer her more than quiet resilience and endless responsibilities. Each morning she woke before dawn, stirring pots of sweet corn and black bean pudding over a charcoal stove, whispering prayers that today's sales would be enough to cover rice, electricity, and her aging mother's medicine. She was used to the stares of strangers at the market, some warm, some indifferent, tanned. She had grown accustomed to standing alone beneath the weight of her days. But Toan was different. Toan did not simply look at her. He noticed her. Not the vendor in worn sandals. Not the girl with wind-tangled hair selling dessert for 5,000 dong a cup. But the woman who worked with trembling hands, yet steady spirit. Diem did not know when his presence became familiar. Perhaps it was the day he appeared at her doorstep after visiting one of his injured workers, or when he quietly helped her carry heavy pots without asking questions. She assumed he was merely kind, like a passing summer breeze, one that cools but never lingers. She was wrong. Toan had been watching her from afar far longer than she knew. As a construction manager, he was used to dealing with storms both in weather and in people. But there was something about Diem that disarmed him more than any typhoon. She carried struggle like a secret melody, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. He found excuses to see her, bringing fruits she never asked for, tools she never requested, and questions she always deflected with shy laughter. She called him Sep, like everyone else, but he wished she wouldn't. He didn't want to be above her. He wanted to be beside her. Yet Diem kept her walls high, mistaking his care for pity, mistaking his silence for hesitation. And so, between them lay not words, but misunderstandings unspoken, accumulating like rain before a flood. But that night, everything began to change. The sun had already dipped behind the roofs when Diem returned home, carrying the few remaining cups of sweet pudding in a metal container. She planned to save one for Toan, the little boy next door, who waited for her like clockwork each evening. But tonight, before she could even set the pot down, she heard footsteps outside the gate, steady, confident, too familiar to mistake. "Evening," Toan said, appearing with a plastic bag stuffed full of vegetables, meat, and spices. He looked slightly awkward, like a soldier holding flowers instead of a weapon. Diem blinked, startled. "Sep, why are you here?" "Don't call me that," he muttered gently, stepping past her before she could protest. "I was passing by. Thought you might not have eaten." She knew that was a lie. The nearest route to anywhere from his construction site did not pass by her tiny house. Still, she let him in, watching as he placed the groceries neatly on her wooden table, as if he had done it 100 times. "You don't need to do this," she said softly. "Maybe I do," he replied without looking at her. She wanted to argue, but the words melted when she saw how carefully he washed the vegetables, how his large hands moved with surprising tenderness. There was no pity in his actions, only intention. They cooked side by side, shoulders brushing in the cramped kitchen. He chopped garlic while she stirred the pot, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. Every so often, he would ask simple questions. "Did you sell well today? Are you tired?" And she would answer with hesitant honesty. When the meal was ready, they sat across a small wooden table, knees almost touching. The air smelled of fish sauce and ginger, but beneath it was something unnamed, something fragile. "Can I stay here tonight?" Toan asked suddenly. Her spoon froze midair. She looked up, startled. "Stay. I have to leave early for work tomorrow." "It's closer from here," he said calmly. Another lie, a gentle one. Diem hesitated. Walls built over years of disappointment trembled silently. But Toan did not rush her. He waited, steady as a pillar. Finally, she nodded. "You can." And just like that, a quiet promise settled between them, neither spoken nor defined, but deeply, undeniably real. Tonight, misunderstandings did not vanish. But for the first time, they began to lose their power. Night fell softly over the small house, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant motorbikes fading into silence. After washing the dishes, Diem spread a thin mattress in the living room, as she always did for rare guests. Toan watched her quietly. "You sleep in your room," he said. "I'll stay here." She shook her head. "This is fine. I always sleep here." Toan frowned slightly, not in disapproval, but in quiet sorrow, realizing again how little comfort she allowed herself. He did not argue. Instead, he simply lay down on the straw mat beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the gentle ticking of the wall clock, and Diem's soft breathing as she turned to face the ceiling. Yet Toan could sense her unease, not fear of him, but fear of what this closeness might awaken. "Diem," he said finally, his voice low. She did not answer, but he knew she was listening. "You don't always have to be strong." Her fingers clenched around the corner of the blanket. She almost laughed because strength was never a choice. It was survival. Toan continued, staring at the wooden ceiling. "People think bravery is loud, but sometimes it is quiet. Like a woman selling sweet pudding at dawn, smiling even when no one smiles back." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of her like that. She turned slightly toward him. In the dimness, she could only see the outline of his face, but somehow that made him feel closer. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered, almost afraid of the answer. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of held restraint. "Because every time I look at you," he said, voice steady yet raw, "I feel home." Silence followed, not empty, but full, heavy with meaning. Diem's chest trembled. She did not know what to say. She had been many things in life: worker, daughter, vendor, survivor, but never someone's home, and she was terrified of believing it. She turned away, pressing her hands to her face as if to hide emotions she could no longer contain. Her shoulders shook not with sobs, but with the effort of holding them back. Toan hesitated only a moment before reaching out. He did not pull her close. Not yet. But his hand rested gently on her back, warm and patient, a silent vow that he would wait as long as it took. And though she did not speak, he could feel it, her heartbeat. Not in his arms, not yet, but close. So close. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The room remained dim and quiet, but something unseen had shifted, like the air before dawn, holding its breath before the first light breaks. Toan's hand stayed on Diem's back, steady and unwavering, as if anchoring her to a world where she no longer had to struggle alone. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she lowered her hands from her face. Her breathing was uneven, fragile as thin glass. "Diem," Toan whispered again, softer this time, afraid that any louder and she would retreat behind her walls once more. "Look at me." She hesitated, then finally turned. Her eyes were not filled with tears but with exhaustion, longing, and a kind of fear that came not from danger, but from hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want more than survival. Toan did not ask permission. He simply opened his arms, slow, gentle, offering rather than taking. She stared at him. Then, before courage could escape her, she moved toward him. Not with grace, but with the heaviness of someone who had carried too much for too long. And when her forehead touched his chest, when her hands clutched the fabric of his shirt, as if afraid he would disappear, Toan finally closed his arms around her. No words were spoken. None were needed. Her heartbeat pressed against him, fast, uneven, trembling like a bird caught between flight and surrender. For years, she had hidden every fear, every loneliness, every quiet wish beneath silence. But here, in his embrace, her heart spoke louder than any confession. And Toan heard it clearly, fiercely, unmistakably. He rested his chin gently atop her head, tightening his hold just enough to tell her she was safe. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm here." She didn't answer. But her heartbeat did. And for Toan, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever known. Not the pounding of passion, not the rhythm of desire, but the quiet thump of trust given after countless misunderstandings, countless hesitations. At last, Diem's walls fell, not with shouts, but with a sigh against his chest. And in that fragile silence, Toan finally knew. She had let him in.
In the story of Toan and Diem, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. Sometimes, love is not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about patience, understanding, and silent consistency. Both of them had lived in their own shadows, Diem hardened by loneliness and survival, Toan restrained by respect and fear of pushing too far. Their misunderstandings did not come from lack of affection, but from hesitation, pride, and the silent assumption that the other might not feel the same. Yet through every moment of distance, Toan never stopped showing up, not with pressure, but with presence. He did not demand trust. He earned it.
And Diem, who had learned to rely only on herself, did not surrender her heart in an instant. It took countless small acts of care, countless evenings of quiet companionship, and one vulnerable moment of breaking down in his arms. The lesson here is profound. True connection is built not in words, but in actions repeated gently over time. We often believe that strength means never needing help, never showing pain, never shedding a tear. But Diem's strength was not in holding everything in, it was in finally allowing herself to lean on someone. And Toan's strength was not in rescuing her like a hero, but in staying by her side long enough for her to realize she didn't have to stand alone. Love is not found, it is grown. It is not taken, it is given. And above all, it is not proven through passion, but through patience. Sometimes, the purest confession is not "I love you," but "I'm here, and I won't leave." When Toan finally heard Diem's heartbeat in his arms, it was more than a sign of affection, it was the sound of a guarded heart choosing to trust. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful lesson of all. When two people stop trying to be strong alone and start being vulnerable together, that is when love silently takes root and becomes unbreakable. Another powerful truth reflected in Toan and Diem's journey is that not every wound is visible, and not every warrior wears armor you can see. Diem was hardworking, cheerful on the surface, and resilient in every struggle, but behind that strength was a woman exhausted from carrying the weight of life alone. Many people look strong simply because they have no other choice. That is why kindness matters. A simple presence, a gentle question, or a silent embrace may not change the world, but it can change someone's world. Toan did not heal Diem with miracles. He healed her with steadiness. He did not ask her to soften. He simply stayed until she chose to. And when she finally allowed herself to lean into him, she did not become weaker, she became freer. In life, we often chase the idea of being independent to the point of isolation, thinking that relying on someone means being a burden. But the truth is, accepting help is also an act of love, both for yourself and for the one offering it. A heart that lets someone in is not fragile, it is brave. The story also reminds us that relationships are not built overnight. They are not about perfection, but perseverance. Misunderstandings will always exist, differences will always arise, and fears will always whisper doubts. But love is not about avoiding these things, it is about facing them together. Toan and Diem did not magically solve all their problems the moment they embraced. Their struggles remained. But they were no longer battles fought alone, they became shared burdens, shared dreams, and shared hopes. And perhaps that is the real definition of love, not someone who fixes everything for you, but someone who chooses to walk through everything with you. So whenever you meet someone who stays through your storms, listen closely. Because before you even speak, they will hear your heartbeat and quietly answer with their own, "I'm here."